Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's industry-presented webinar, Increase Member Motivation and Engagement with Wearable Technology. A few housekeeping things before we get started. This is a voice over IP webinar, meaning it's totally web-based. If you experience audio difficulties or if the video begins to buffer, it's likely caused by the strength of your internet signal. If you have a question during the webinar, please type it into the question area within the GoToWebinar navigation, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. We also encourage you to join the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter by using the hashtag ACSMWebinar. Today's webinar is sponsored and presented by Polar. Polar is an industry leader in heart rate monitors, activity trackers, training apps, and online services. With 40 years of experience in innovative sports research, Polar caters to all levels of fitness. One continuing education credit, or CEC, courtesy of Polar, will be emailed to all participants after the webinar. You should receive the CEC email and link to the slides presented today within the next 1 to 2 days. There is no need to email ACSM asking about CEC credit. Today's webinar presenter is George Centeo. George has a Master of Arts degree from the University of Northern Iowa and a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Hawaii. George currently serves as the Manager of Training and Education at Polar. In this role, he works directly with physical education instructors, personal trainers, fitness directors, health club owners, and strength and conditioning staff at various collegiate and professional coaches across the country. George and his staff conduct hundreds of online and on-site trainings annually, educating professionals on how to best utilize and incorporate heart rate-based training into their respective programs. Whether he is strength training, running, or playing sports recreationally, George always trains with a heart rate monitor. It is with great pleasure that I present to you George Centeo.
Thanks for that introduction, Nate. And like I mentioned, speaking of those online and on-site trainings, I just caught the red eye back from Seattle. I was with some PE teachers, some middle school teachers out there in Anacortes, Washington. So had a real good day with them yesterday, but didn't want to do the webcam just because coming off of not a lot of sleep and all that. But happy to be here with everybody today, and we'll go ahead and get started. The topic of the webinar is increased member motivation and engagement with wearable technology. And I'm sure we probably have a few repeat viewers here. I've done a couple of these, did one in the summer of 2015 and at the end of the year last year, all kind of revolving around similar topics. One was more on individual training and heart rate. The second one was kind of a mix and more just wearable technology with sleep tracking, activity tracking. The focus of this is kind of more in the health club gym environment. So kind of think about that as we go. And for those of you who have been on before, some of the slides topics in the beginning may be sort of review, kind of going over some of that fundamental heart rate science stuff. And then towards the end, we'll get into more how to apply it and the practical applications. So I want to start just with this quick statement here that 50% of people starting an exercise program will drop out within the first 6 months. So that means if you're looking at this image on the screen here, of those four people you see, a couple of them probably won't be back to this club within the rest of the year or by next year. So if you want to prevent that from happening and you want to prevent members from leaving your gym or club, it's important that you answer the question, how can you retain members? And if you got the answer to this, you could probably make, tons and tons of money because it's definitely of interest to owners and fitness professionals across the world. It's not too complicated. At the end of the day, you want to keep people engaged, and some research shows that doing assessments and reporting improvements is critically important and encouraging in regard to exercise commitment. So it's more than just showing up and jumping on a treadmill or showing up and doing a workout. It's having those assessments and charting progress can definitely have an impact. And another thing that tends to be important is the support from exercise professionals. So that shouldn't be discounted either, that fitness professionals, teachers, coaches, trainers, sharing that knowledge and expertise can really help keep people hooked and wanting more as far as that, seeing improvement and progress. So the way this is going to break down today, we have 5 learning objectives. And like I mentioned, the first 3 are kind of more fundamental, basic heart rate science topics, concepts, talking about determining max heart rate, because that's a critical piece to any heart rate training program. We'll look at the 5 different heart rate training zones and their benefits. We'll also look at a few things that you can utilize to chart progress or lack thereof, and those mainly that I'll focus on are average heart rate, resting heart rate, and recovery heart rate. And then finally, a couple things to end as far as practical applications. We'll look at implementing wearable technology in a group fitness setting for you group fitness instructors, and more in the larger club group setting. But then finally, how to engage and motivate clients with wearable technology just in general. And this could be more geared towards, your personal trainers, or even you for yourself, working with a friend, somebody you see at the gym, that type of thing. So our first objective, describe various ways to determine max heart rate. So I'm sure, you guys have come across and seen many different, formulas and different ways of getting max heart rate. But first of all, let's define it. Heart rate is simply highest number of beats per minute someone can achieve in an all-out effort. It's based on age, heredity, and fitness level. It typically decreases over your lifespan with age. It is not affected by training. So sometimes that's a misconception that if I work really hard or if I train in the red zone, I can raise or lower my max heart rate. Your max heart rate is it is what it is. Over time, it will go down. It won't stay, your ceiling won't stay at 200 or, 190 or whatever forever. It will gradually decrease. But what can happen with training is your ability to sort of achieve closer to your max or train at or near your max heart rate, that could be affected with training. But your max heart rate isn't really affected by training. But the last part here I put is, it's the key first step in any heart rate-based training program. Just because when you see these charts and ranges and zones and colors, yellow, red, orange, green, get in your zone and that stuff, they're all based off of your max heart rate. So you want to make sure that you got a pretty good handle on that and you have an accurate max heart rate so everything else falls into place. So ideally, to get a true max heart rate, the only way to determine that would be to do a maximal stress test. It's not very comfortable. It's very demanding. Typically, this would be administered by a cardiologist or exercise physiologist, usually on a treadmill or bike, where you continue to increase the intensity, whether that's an incline or a speed, gradually over time. And heart rate will climb along with the increase in intensity, but eventually you keep pushing the incline, the speed, heart rate is going up, and eventually heart rate levels off and doesn't go up anymore. And that would be your true max heart rate. So, 170, 180, 181, 181, 181. And, that's kind of our point. So 181 would be like your max heart rate. Now, that's not obviously for everybody, very conditioned athletes and folks like that. It's fine to go do a true max test. But for your average person, getting off the couch, looking to start exercising, it's not recommended, probably not a good idea. So, what do we do with the rest of us, or, for other folks? How do we, find that max heart rate? And, 220 minus age serves as a good starting point. I know, like in all of the Polar devices, like out of the box, when you put in your information, it will predict your max heart rate based off of 220 minus your age as a starting point. And the good news is with plus or minus 10 beats, like that works for 70% of the population. So, most people, that's going to work pretty well. But that means it doesn't work for everybody. And what if you're one of the outliers? What if, and you can't tell by looking at somebody, you can't say, wow, she looks fit, or, he's overweight and he probably has a lower or higher heart rate. Everybody is different. There's a lot of things that factor into that. So the best way is really to get in and do some type of activity and make adjustments as needed. So oftentimes, like when we talk to instructors and when we're in gyms and with teachers and things like that, it's put them through things that they're already doing. For instance, your your soccer coaches or your strength and conditioning coaches that are already putting athletes through a interval test or a beat test, going till failure. They're probably getting pretty close, not their true max heart rate, but they got a pretty good look at it, and they can use that as a starting point or a gauge, and then keep an eye on it. Maybe in a game, somebody who we set their heart rate at 190, we notice in Thursday's match, they got up to 198. We can go in and update that. Again, now things will be more accurate. Similarly, in the club setting, if somebody takes a group class, whether it's indoor cycling or anything else, and it's 45 minutes and there's moments of some hard work and they're really putting out, again, they may not get their true max, but you can make it more accurate than it was with just 220 minus age. And I have an example here of a 50-year-old, so 220 minus 50, their max would be 170. They're in that class, they're getting after it, and at the end, you look at the max heart rate, and if you see that they got up as high as 183 beats per minute, obviously 170 is not their ceiling, it's not their max, and we need to make an adjustment. So you could simply, this is where feedback and having that conversation comes into play, because it's not that we just put 183, but you could, ask the individual, how did you feel? And they may say, yeah, I pretty much emptied the tank. I don't know if I could go much more. Then they may be pretty close, maybe 5 more beats. But if they say, I felt pretty good, but, I certainly didn't, I wasn't out of breath or like I could go a little more, then you might add like 10 beats to that number and use that as a max heart rate. So the good news is it's not like you got one chance to get it right. And, it's no good if you don't. You can always refine that and get more fine-tuned. But the takeaway point is get to know the individual, the body, see how you're responding, and make adjustments as needed. But 220 minus age is a nice starting point. So just to give an example, let's say this group of individuals came in for a class for the first time, and I noticed two gentlemen here, Sean and John, achieved greater than 100% of their max. And I know coaches and trainers oftentimes say, give 110%, but, realistically, you can't go over 100% of your max if you have it correct. So what this is telling us is we don't have the correct max heart rate. So this would be an opportunity to have that quick conversation with Sean and John, and how did you feel? And, maybe John said, yeah, I could go a little harder. Go ahead and take that up. Instead of 174, let's update your max to 185. Sean says, I almost passed out. That was the hardest I've ever worked before, or whatever. We may, just keep it right at 196 or maybe 200 when he updates his max heart rate. So hopefully that gives you some ideas on how you can kind of fine tune that and get the max heart rate set. A more formal or systematic way, like if you go on the Polar website, I believe you can find a simple field test that I kind of broke down and outlined here, but I can just kind of give you the summary. And it's meant to be done, outdoors or anywhere, like if you're a runner or whatever, if you want to go just get outside and figure it out. All you need is a hill that would take you about 2 minutes to climb. And what you would do is get warmed up on a flat surface for about 15 minutes, because you want to gradually kind of build that up at a normal training pace, whatever you would normally kind of run at. And then you would go attack that hill at a pace you could hold for about 20 minutes. So we're not talking about an all-out effort here on the first round, and you'll see that there's a few rounds. So you take that up, should be a couple minutes, then you come back down to the base of the hill, and you're going to run up again. This time you want to go at a pace that you could maintain for about 1.5 miles, maybe 2 miles. So if you're at like a 10-minute mile pace or a 9-minute mile pace type of runner that you can hold that, or 8-minute mile pace, you want to kind of stay at that type of pace and make it up the hill again. At this point, you're getting probably within 10 beats or so of that max heart rate, but you'll come back down the hill, and you want to allow some time to let your heart rate drop a little bit, about 30 to 40 beats from where you were. So if you were up at, let's say, as high as 175, kind of keep an eye on it, let your heart rate come down to about 140, 130, and then you go and crank it up one last time. And this time you really want to kind of push it, basically at an intensity that you're pretty much going all out, a pace you could hold for like 1 minute and not much more. And at that point, when you get to the top of the hill or halfway up the hill, you'll be pretty close to your max. And you could actually use that as your new max heart rate and kind of work from there. And of course, make sure you cool down after doing that intense activity, because it's not just an assessment, but you probably get a good little workout in there. And, you know, a treadmill, you could do the same thing and mimic those conditions on a treadmill with an incline, and kind of do the same thing indoors if needed. But so once you get that max heart rate determined, you got the first step taken care of. Now you can kind of get into a more focused approach and kind of, what zones do I want to be in, how long, and it depends on, you know, the type of training and what activities you're doing. But you can feel more confident that the zones will be more meaningful and you'll kind of get what you're looking for. When it comes to the zone training, you know, it doesn't always mean working faster or harder. It depends on your goals, and you want to train at the right intensity. So meaning training the right energy systems, training the right intensity to allow for, you know, recovery. If you're, like, let's say preparing for a competition or sport specific stuff, you want to do, if you're in a sport that is a lot of short bursts, you want to kind of mimic that in your training with that specificity kind of applying to what you're doing. You wouldn't be going for, you know, long, slow runs if you're, you know, doing a short explosive type of activity for your sport. So different intensities got different benefits. If you're going really hard, of course, that's usually for short periods of time, and that's where you get that concept of training with intervals. And because most people can't maintain much time like in the red zone, it would be for short bursts and then allowing for some recovery and then repeating. So this chart, I think, is really good. It kind of just gives a simple look at the 5 kind of standard training zones. And, you know, if you look at the colors, you could think of it as the colors get warmer, kind of from gray, and work your way up. It's kind of mimics the intensity. As the intensity gets harder, the colors get darker or warmer. So you go gray, blue, green, yellow, red. And you could think of it, if you use the analogy like traffic lights or traffic signals, you know, green is, you know, you're fine, you're good to go. Continue. Yellow, you may want to have some caution, because if you're not careful, pretty soon you'll start to feel uncomfortable and need to back off a little bit. And that's also, by the way, like when it comes to strength training or different things like that, body weight exercises even, this is where form starts to break down. If people are, you know, too high for too long, then you start to see breakdowns in form and things like that. So depending on what you're doing, you know, allowing for adequate recovery is an important component. And then, of course, if you're in the red, that's, you know, it's red for a reason. You don't want to be there too long. Eventually you're going to want to stop. And again, allow yourself to recover, and you can go get right back in there. It's not that there's anything wrong with the red zone per se. It's just should be used kind of sparingly and not for extended periods of time. And off to the right of the chart, I like where it's got that kind of pyramid. I use that as a good visual, where whether you're looking at within a single workout or over a week or a month, like if you look at the breakdown, a lot of balanced programs will look similar to this, where a lot of the bulk of the training is in that green, yellow, and you get a little bit of red, a little bit of blue. But, you know, again, it kind of depends on your goals, and obviously that would look a lot different for a marathon runner or somebody training for a half marathon, something like that. There would be more of that aerobic base building, more of that, you know, zone 2, longer, slower endurance runs and so forth. But in general, you're looking at kind of that breakdown, green, yellow, with a little bit of red, a little bit of blue. So just some other terms and concepts I'm sure you've all heard of and are aware of, and you may see on charts or on treadmills and different things, you know, stay within this safe range, or try to stay between 60 and 80% or 65 to 85%. A lot of that comes from, you know, sort of that determined, and it's not the same for everybody, but it's about or approximately 65% of max heart rate is where most people start with that aerobic threshold where you start accumulating the lactate, but it's still not at a level where you can't process it, so you're fine. But that's where it starts accumulating, usually around that 65%, and then 85%. Again, it varies. Some people it's 88, 89, 83. It depends, but about 85% of max heart rate is where people have their anaerobic threshold, and that's usually the breathing heavy, out of breath. The body is struggling to, function and maintain that intensity and process the lactate and so forth. That's what it shows up. If you were to take the samples and stuff, you would see that lactate accumulating at those levels. So, another thing, just to keep it simple with people, that gets thrown around a lot too, is, moderate to vigorous physical activity, that MVPA. That's represented by your green, yellow, red, those top 3 zones. So for cardio fitness and, improving on that front, spending time there, is definitely a good idea. HIIT training is very popular. That's that high intensity interval training. And typically, depending on the format and what you're doing, those usually look in some form of, when you're working, your goal is to be in that yellow, sometimes maybe touching even that red for a little bit, but primarily in the yellow zone. And when you're resting or recovering, or if you're doing like station work and transitioning to the next movement or station or circuit, that would be catching your breath, and you should be recovering back down into the green. Again, if you're just kind of staying up in the yellow the whole time, you may want to add a little more time for that recovery to take place. And then finally, again, I'll make that point with the zone 2 for those endurance athletes, or for folks, looking to, especially train for a longer event and things like that. Zone 2 is a crucial piece there. And a lot of triathletes and things, like, they'll start their training with the first few weeks building that aerobic base, that foundation. And this is where you get, good with, fat utilization and oxidation. That's just using fat as an energy source. Sometimes fat burn, people mistake that and think zone 2 is labeled the fat burning zone. So they think, oh, if I'm in zone 2, nice and easy, I'll burn a ton of fat. And it's referred to as the fat burning zone because at that intensity, you're utilizing more fat as an energy source. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're burning a ton of fat or losing a bunch of weight if you're training there, but it does make you more efficient at training aerobically and utilizing fat more as an energy source. And it is a nice foundation, especially for endurance athletes. And to be honest, anybody can benefit from it, because even if you are a sprinter or somebody like that, when you have that sort of lower floor or a nice base to stand on, you can still get more output even at the higher end. So often neglected, but it takes a lot of discipline and dedication to train there. A lot of folks just kind of want to get going and get that heart rate up, and it's not easy to stay in zone 2, but there's definitely some benefits if you take the time to train in there and build that base. So what I wanted to show is just a visual representation. This is a sample of like an interval workout. And just so you know, this is one of mine, so I could speak to it. But the goal was a quarter mile. This was done on a treadmill, but a quarter mile hard in zones 4 and 5 was the goal. And then a minute 30 of rest. And the goal was to be in the green and wishful thinking, maybe even a little blue on the recovery. And you could see initially there was a little bit of green in there. And as you got deeper into the intervals, after that minute and a half, just barely touching the green and then going again, and climbing into the red for a short periods of time. And you could see the peaks and valleys, but the valleys aren't getting down into the green like we wanted. So this is an example of how you can use the data you're looking at, and whether it's on a watch or whatever you're doing to get this, you have the information, you can make conscious decisions moving forward to address that. So one easy modification I could make is, let's go 2 minutes on the recovery instead of a minute 30 and see if it makes a difference. It also may be that over time, as I increase and improve my efficiency and fitness, a minute 30 may be enough to get me down into the green and maybe even the blue. But right now, that's not what the data is showing. So if I want to make a modification or accommodation, I could do that by allowing more recovery time. So that's just an example of whether you're doing it for yourself or working with a client, suggestions you can make, ways you can sort of make some purposeful changes in what you're doing. So in the next section, we're going to look at a few more examples of some concepts that can be applied and tools, if you will, in your toolbox that you can show progress or lack thereof. So resting heart rate is a good one, just because it's easy to do, and you know, it's best to measure first thing in the morning, right when you get out of bed. If you put on a heart rate monitor, lay back down, relax, and kind of see where you're at. And it's recommended that you do this 3 or 5 consecutive days, and then take an average, just in case you had a bad night's sleep, maybe you're stressed, overtrained, whatever. You don't want that to affect and give you a false reading. So take a few days, take the average, and kind of see where you're at. And so that'll give you your starting point. And, resting heart rate is affected by age, fitness level, genetics, health status, gender, anatomy is different between males and females, and so on. So all of that kind of factors in. But what we do know is, as you improve your cardio fitness, you should see a lowering or a decrease in your resting heart rate. And the reason is, your heart's like any other muscle, and as you train it, it becomes more efficient. You're increasing your stroke volume with every beat. And so at rest, the heart doesn't have to work as hard to get that blood and oxygen circulated throughout the body. So therefore, it's more efficient, and you have a slower or lower resting heart rate. For adults, it's usually between 60 to 80 beats per minute. But in elite athletes, world-class cyclists, runners, things like that, you could see it as low as 30 beats per minute for top athletes. And at a most basic level, again, I use the term like knowing your body. It's pretty cool, and not even your true resting heart rate, but just your kind of showing up at the gym heart rate. I know, for myself, every time I turn on my monitor or whatever, I'm usually at the same point, like 30% of my max, or 28%, 30. And that's kind of consistent, every day. If I'm ready to go for a run, I turn on about 30%, I get going. Go to the gym, about 30%, get going. Well, if one day I look down, I'm at 47%, something's up. And it could be that I just caught a red eye the night before. It could be I've been going back to back, kind of not a lot of sleep. Could be I've been training hard a few days in a row. But again, your body lets you know, and that's one of the things you can kind of look at is if you see you're kind of normal with your resting heart rate, and all of a sudden you see it elevated and it's exceptionally high, that could be a sign of illness or overexertion. So it's something worth kind of monitoring and keeping track of. But it's also something tangible that you could celebrate with a friend, with a client, again, with yourself. If you see improvement there where, shoot, when I started 3 months ago, I remember doing this in the morning and I was at 72 beats. That was kind of where I was at. Now I'm doing it and I'm at 59 beats. That's a noticeable difference. That's something you can celebrate and, again, keep people motivated and encouraged. Something tangible that they can see that's more than just staring at a scale. And too often, a lot of people, that's their only gauge of, am I getting better? Am I getting more fit? Am I reaching my goals? And the ultimate goal may be weight loss and so on. But, too often we neglect looking at all the positive changes, whether it's in body composition, cardio fitness, strength, things like that along the way. And anytime you can measure that and show progress, it's a good thing. So another one, quick and easy sort of, that you could do is average heart rate. It's just one number that you got to look at. And with most devices, you'll get it at the end of the session. It'll provide the average heart rate, which is simply, kind of the overall measure of intensity for that session. So you may have been as high as 170 beats. You may have been as low as 120 something, but at the end, your average was 145 for this session. Kind of gives you, in a nutshell, a representation of the intensity of that session. What's nice is if you hold things constant, you can kind of use it as an assessment piece. And I use an example here with the treadmill. Just if you, again, I use a treadmill because you can hold those things constant. let's say 2% incline, 5 miles an hour, 15 minutes. And at the end of it, stop your heart rate. Where are you at? Average heart rate for that session was 155 beats. So you train, you do your thing. We're going to measure it again. It's been a while, say 6 to 8 weeks. Let's get on there. You're doing the same 2% incline, 5 miles an hour, 15 minutes, but this time your heart rate is 140 beats. That's noticeable improvement. So it means you're becoming more efficient. Could be you're improving your fitness, but the fact is you're doing the same intensity, but it's not as taxing, not as hard on your body, and you're ready for more. So if you want to continue to gain and improve, we know a couple of principles, but like the overload, you're going to have to, apply more stimulus. So whether that's in the fit principles, so more intensity, more time, the types of training you're doing, frequency, you can start making changes and increasing those things if you want to continue to improve and get better. But this is where if you just do the same thing over and over and your body gets accustomed to it, you get conditioned, you're not going to progress. You're not going to see the gains that you want. So it's, mix it up and find other ways to challenge your body and get that heart rate up and recover and all that good stuff. So average heart rate, another tool that you can use to kind of assess and see progress or where you're at. And then a third one is recovery heart rate. And this is simply the speed at which your heart rate returns to normal after exercise. And it's another great measure of cardiac fitness. In a practical sense, there's a couple ways to look at it. Like if you're just nothing like formal or systematic, just kind of you pay attention to the clock or whatever, there's two ways. One is give yourself a set time, like 1 minute or 2 minutes of rest immediately after an activity. And you can chart how many beats you recover or decrease in that minute or 2 minutes. And then look at that in a similar activity or months later, kind of see if there's any difference there in the number of beats. The other one is if you give yourself a set time. So if you say, or you measure the time. So if you say, I'm doing a working phase and I'm getting up to 160 beats, I want to get back to 120, which is where I was before I started this set or this interval or whatever. And so I stopped and then I keep an eye on the clock and keep an eye. And when I get back to 120, it took me 2 minutes and 12 seconds to get back to 120, or now it's taking me 45 seconds to get back to 120. So two ways you can look at it. It's number of beats in a set time, or it's how long does it take you to get back to where you want to be as far as that recovery. And there's other things out there, like, I don't know if it's still used as much, but like the YMCA 3-minute step test, there's a chart for men, a chart for women. And that one actually gives, after the minute of rest, some numbers that if you're at this, that's for your age and gender, you're good or poor and that kind of stuff. So there's different things out there. I have an example here, one that I come across and look at is a 2-minute recovery test. And this slide is basically just showing kind of how to set it up and what to do. And it's basically just get warmed up, and then you want to be working for a little bit, between 60 to 80% of your max heart rate. So it's not a maximum effort or going crazy, but kind of get working, get your heart rate up and be between 60 to 80%. So I took like a 40-year-old, for instance, 220 minus 40, 180. So if you went off of that, this would be pretty close, 108 to 140. So let's just say you get your heart rate up to about 140, and then you want to record that, and that would be considered your working heart rate. So I'd jot that down. I'd stop, have a seat, relax, catch my breath. 2 minutes later, you want to record where you're at, and that would be your recovery, where your recovery heart rate, where is that? So let's say you get down to 85 beats per minute, and you subtract the two. So 140 minus the 85, and the difference would then be that number we're looking for, that how many beats did you recover in that 2 minutes. And in this case, it'd be 55 beats, 140 to getting down to 85. And if you go to, how to interpret that, again, it's not so much these set numbers. As you can see, there's not a whole lot of difference between 52 and 53 beats and then put you in another category. But it's more so looking at where were you when you started, where are you now, and if you want to kind of use it as a gauge to see your fitness. But just to show kind of like your biological age, or like your body compared to your chronological age or your calendar age. So if you fall within these various ranges, as you could see here, that kind of shows where you're at, whether your body is like sort of a lot younger than the 40-year-old that your age says you are, or vice versa. And on the flip side, if you're doing a test like this and after 1 minute, heart rate has not recovered at least like 12 or 20 beats, that it's definitely cause for concern, and it's worth getting looked at, getting evaluated. And these are times where sometimes folks that think they're healthy and normal and doing their thing, but they stumble upon something like this, they get it checked out, and they find out they actually have like a 90% blockage in an artery, and they get a stent put in right away. I mean, there's stories like that that you hear. And so again, listening to your body, if you kind of see what's going on, doesn't make sense, doesn't seem normal, it's worth sort of looking into further. And that would be an example of that. Obviously, if you're recovering 60 beats and above, I mean, that's pretty strong. And that's in the good, excellent kind of range or category. So that was kind of a foundation, if you will, some of the heart rate science, some basic concepts you can use to chart progress and so on. Now I want to move to how to make this sort of come to life and how to implement it in a group fitness setting. This is more, again, in your clubs and gyms and so on. So I'll show a few examples here. So, you know, again, you've been around, you've seen this out and about. There's different clubs, different franchises, different technologies that people use. Obviously, you could see I work for Polar, so I'm most familiar with our technology and can obviously speak to that better. So that's what I'll be using as in my examples. But again, there's a lot of different things out there that people use, but ultimately kind of getting at the same thing. These are tools to help show intensity, recovery, calorie expenditure, things that people care about, and you know, you can add value. This slide I always put here, and I like it, with kind of a concept of, you can look at this technology, and just because you have some cool technology doesn't mean it's going to increase results or grow your business or anything else. And the key is to leverage the technology, to use it to add value and show results, and ultimately make the experience more fun and engaging for your members. And that's when you start to see enrollments are up, people are sticking around, there's more of a buzz, there's more interest, and that's kind of the take home. And you know, how do you get there? I think this guy can help you here, the Kool-Aid man, but I think it starts with the staff, the fitness instructors. They need to drink the Kool-Aid, I like to say, and they got to be on board. They can't just, you know, have it up there and it's something that they show. They need to kind of understand it and, you know the basic concepts, but also give that individualized instruction in the group setting, take people into the various training zones and so forth. So the staff is an important part of it. They have to buy in, they have to understand the basics, and they have to, you know, utilize it effectively. As far as, you know, how does it work? What's really needed? How do you get those heart rates up on the screen and stuff like that? I mean, as far as the individual or the participant is concerned, at least again, like with the Polar Club solution, they basically would wear their own device, or they could borrow one from the club. But whether it was a chest strap, kind of a more traditional, getting an electrical signal coming from the heart, or, you know, a wrist-based option where they're wearing a watch, like the couple I have here, the A370, the M430. So those are doing the optical heart rate from the wrist, but it sends it via Bluetooth to an iPad, and the instructor has the iPad up in the front. And you could just have the iPad, or you could project it on a TV, or on a projector, on a wall, on a screen, and that's kind of the end result. So just real quick on this, it come up before, it comes up a lot. People have that question: how accurate are the different devices? And what do you recommend and stuff. And it really comes down to personal preference. I know a lot's gone into at least the engineering and design and so forth on the technology, like with Polar, when we came out with the optical heart rate. And the idea and the goal is to make it as accurate as the chest strap. Now, there's some challenges in the sense of it's two different modes of measurement. One is the electrical signal coming from the heart. The other is measuring blood flow beneath the skin at the wrist. So you're not comparing two, similar things. You're using different modalities. So that you're never going to get exactly the same. But I can tell you through testing and different things that in certain environments, they are pretty identical, almost, exactly. If you overlay the graphs of the heart rate and stuff, they're exactly the same. That's often in steady state training, jogging for 5 miles an hour, for instance, for 40 minutes. There's very little difference. Sometimes where we see some variance is at the very high and low intensities, when you get a lot of those pronounced peaks and valleys. Also, sometimes depending on constriction and if you're gripping and doing a lot of movements and lifting and things, because of the fact that this is on the wrist, sometimes that comes into play, and you do see a little bit of variance. For me personally, I've seen, I'd say in certain activities, anywhere from like 8 to 10 beats difference, where usually the chest strap will give me sort of the more pronounced peaks and valleys, and the wrist base might be still following the same trend, usually still in the same zone, but maybe 8 to 10 beats slower, if you will, or, kind of lagging behind or beneath where the other is. So that's just from my experience. But for a lot of folks, convenience kind of wins out, and for whatever reason, they don't want to wear the chest strap, and so they're fine with the wrist-based option. So I guess I'm not here to say one is right or wrong or anything else. It's whatever works for you. And the main thing is, either way, they're reliable in the sense of what they're showing you. It's something that you can track and trend and continue to utilize in your programming. So in the next few slides, I'll kind of highlight this club solution. What kind of data are you looking at? How can you use it with your participants and as an instructor and so forth? So it's quite simple. You load your classes in there. Somebody will come in, get on the iPad. They can, sign into a class. And as an instructor, I would pick a class, hit start, and off we go. And when you're training, the value here is just the immediate and objective feedback. You don't have to second guess. You don't have to try to figure things out. Again, you can kind of be confident in giving that individual instruction in a group setting. For instance, I might kind of encourage Michael to pick it up and get going, add some intensity, add some load, maybe get deeper in his squats and things like that, because I can see he's not quite at the intensity we want him at. Whereas with Jennifer, again, I can, and it's not that I'm calling her out or anything, and that's sort of on your style too and how you use it, but I couldn't tell Jennifer, hey, catch your breath, take a few moments here, kind of bring that heart rate down, lower the intensity, and then let's get back into where we want to be and so on. So it's a great tool to give that instruction. At the end of the session, you get some meaningful data right there. The things you're seeing here, it's kind of small on your screen, I'm sure, but there's average heart rate, that number we talked about, kind of telling you the overall intensity of the session that you can use. There's max heart rate, which is great, especially if this was their first class. It's good to see, oh, wow, you said you're 50, so 170, like you were way above that. So let's go make an adjustment. If somebody hit 187 or something, you could encourage them to go make that adjustment in their profile so that things match up better moving forward. And then, of course, calorie expenditure, which people are always, excited about and happy to see. I will say, though, the quick caution again on calories that, gender, body mass, weight, all those things factor into it, as well as intensity. So if somebody's working really hard or spends a lot of time in the red zone or yellow, they're going to burn more calories than somebody in the blue or green. So if you have somebody who's very fit with a good aerobic base and they're working hard and getting through, but they're only kind of green, they struggle to get into the yellow, they may not burn as many calories as somebody who maybe gets going and they're up in the yellow the whole time and they don't recover much into the green. On paper, it looks like I did awesome. I burned a ton of calories. Like, this is true. You did. That was a lot of hard work for your body. But it's, it's kind of take it with a grain of salt and keep an eye on all of that. That, you don't want a 5'2", 110-pound female getting discouraged because she only, burned 287 calories. But if you're putting her up against a 6'2", 230-pound male, it's not apples to apples. It's not going to be close. So you just making sure people are aware of that, and, not discouraged. And it's always best to look at yourself and kind of use yourself as a reference moving forward instead of doing a lot of the comparison to others. It's a little tip there. And then on the heart rate zones, this is kind of a quick visual representation of where did you spend most of your time. So gray, blue, green, yellow, red. And I could see a couple individuals here with a lot of red time. I might want to have a quick conversation with them just to see, hey, how did it feel? How did you do? And not bad. It was okay. Then that's not matching up, because, I mean, over half the time you were in the red, that seems impossible. So let me see what's going on. And if that's the case where they're saying, yeah, I could go harder, but it was a good class and so on, then that would be an example of saying we may want to raise your max heart rate a little bit so that those zones match up a little more to your body. And then finally, the participants would get some detailed information instead of just, a brief summary at the end. This would go to their own account, but, with a graph of their heart rate, the time in the different zones, as well as that calories, average, and max heart rate. The Polar Club solution, where you have the heart rate like that on display, and the instructor uses it as a tool and a guide, and it's good in a variety of settings. Something like indoor cycling is great. Other applications would be even body weight training, cardio boxing, kickboxing, fitness classes just in general, aerobics, personal and small group training. So, in this case, you may not even be projecting up on the wall. Your instructor could just be sort of floating around, keeping an eye and giving feedback kind of as people are working. And again, those instructors, those trainers, are key. They need to know what they're talking about, and they want to use the technology efficiently. It's not enough to just push the button and have it up on the screen, and that's pretty cool because that'll kind of fade. But if you really engage people, push people, show them the results, show them the progress, you tend to get more out of it. I'm also keeping an eye on the clock here, and I know we got about 10 minutes. I want to leave a few minutes for questions, so I'll kind of pick up the pace a little through this. This is just showing some of when we speak of motivation, having some challenges, having some rewards and fun things that people can shoot for is always a good thing. And so like in the Polar Club, there's a couple different group rewards, and there's a few individual rewards as well. The group rewards are simply every time the group hits 1,000 calories burned as a group, a little trophy will come out and they'll get rewarded, and it'll track that. So at the end of the class, there might be 13 trophies that they earn. That's something you could put up on a board, have a leaderboard in the club or something for bragging rights, maybe even a prize. So that's something you could leverage. Another thing is a zone time. So if you really are doing the zone training, the goal is for everybody to be in the same zone at the same time. And every time that is achieved, that kind of gets called out, and then it tracks that time, and you get, a zone reward, and it'll show how much time people were in the same zone. So that's something you could also track and trend over time. When it comes to the individual ones, I'll just kind of show these real quick. Cool down champ is simply somebody with great recovery. It's the individual who had the fastest heart rate recovery times throughout the session. The zone master is the person who was sort of on task, if you will, spending the most time in the target zone or the zones set out by that class. The range ruler is the person with the greatest range in their heart rate. So if you look at their max heart rate achieved and their minimum heart rate in the session, and you look at the difference, that's sort of the person with the greatest range would be a range ruler. For those of you getting ready for the fantasy football season, that would be when we look at the floors and ceilings of players. Same type of concept there. You can see I'm itching for football to start. Two individuals with the same time in similar zones would be your zone mates. And this would just identify the two people with the most similar looking workouts in terms of intensities. And, they could go over, give a high five, maybe exchange a phone number or something like that. So again, just fun ways to kind of keep people motivated, engaged, and have some, fun with it. And all of these things in the end are set up to provide a more engaging and high quality experience for those members. So our last section here is not just looking at group fitness, but just kind of looking at ways that you can motivate and engage clients with the wearable technology, whatever that may be, that they have or that you have in your facility. You don't need me to tell you that wearable devices are very popular today. You just need to take a look around. I do it a lot as I travel and go places. I tend to look down at people's wrists and see what people have and what's going on, and it's crazy to see how much it's taken off and grown over the years. And actually, I have just a few facts. I shared some on the last one, and I didn't want to be redundant, so I dug up some new ones this time. But so a couple facts on wearable technology. The number of connected wearable devices worldwide is expected to jump from 325 million in 2016 to over 830 million by 2020. So again, the growth is kind of projected. The wearables market is expected to increase 35% by 2019. And then another interesting one is over 50 billion internet-connected devices will exist worldwide by 2020. Now, of course, internet-connected devices is not necessarily just a watch or a wearable or whatever, but I think that one's interesting to look at because it kind of shows that, with the internet-connected device, that need for sort of cloud-based software and people wanting a lot of that stuff at their fingertips, and the convenience of pushing a button and syncing your data and having it all stored and saved, and you can analyze and play with it. And so that's just kind of the world we live in. And for younger folks, that's right in their wheelhouse and very comfortable. For some of us middle folks, we're comfortable and kind of grew up with some of it. For older folks, even some of them older folks are adopting it and getting in there and got their iPhone and kind of doing their thing. And so it's all across the spectrum. Obviously, the sweet spot being that kind of mid-20s, 30s kind of age range, but you do see it at the other ends as well. So the key is not, again, I mentioned this earlier, not just the technology, but how you use it. And, it's a great tool to help build relationships. You can call people by their name. I'm an instructor. I see my class. I know who these people are. I can use their names as we're going through. Why do people stop working out? What are some common reasons people quit? Lack of time is often cited, lack of motivation. Exercise doesn't meet their expectations. So these are folks that come in with a goal or a plan, like, I'm going to lose weight. They exercise, they show up, and they're finding that they're not losing weight. So, they get discouraged, they quit. And oftentimes we know that people with low self-worth and body image tend to drop out quicker than others. So if you have this awareness, it's important to kind of do what you can to address these issues. Time, that's just a tough conversation and people have to figure that out. But all of the others, you can definitely have an impact there when it comes to, showing progress, providing motivation, and being that support for somebody. And, one thing you could say here is know the numbers, know your members. So again, you have more purposeful things to talk about. So instead of just telling Crystal, hey, Crystal, how's it going? Or how's the kids doing? Or giving her some generic feedback like, hey, great job today. You can get more specific. Maintain those relationships, continue to talk and have meaningful conversations with these individuals about their goals, their progress, what's working, what's not. Are they plateauing? These are the kinds of things you could do. And I only got a few more minutes, so I'm trying to move this along here. But finally, this is kind of more on the personal trainer side of things. So one thing you could do is with the training data, you can create targets and kind of set it up ahead of time, have them execute it. And if you're there with them, you can see, but if not, you can kind of see where they're at after by reviewing their data. And then finally running those analysis, whether it's weekly, monthly, daily, and looking at what they're doing. Just a quick example. I used that running example earlier. This is how that would lay out. You could set this up ahead of time. 10-minute warm-up in zones 1 through 3, quarter mile in the yellow red, minute 30 recovery in zones green and blue, and repeat 10 times. So you could set that up and actually load it onto their watch and have it set on their calendar. So when they come in Friday and they hit start, that workout's ready to roll, and they just need to execute and try to hit those targets. I shared this earlier, and this is something, again, where you could, in following up with a client, if this was theirs, you could give them that feedback that, let's take that recovery up to 2 minutes. Let's see if we can, focus on our breathing techniques and try to get that recovery so we can push, even harder and be fresher for those working phases and get more out of them. So that would be an example of utilizing it in that environment. And then in the strength training side, same thing. You could type in workouts, single leg squats, power cleans, whatever. You can type them in, what intensities you want them at, and then have them execute, and then look at the data again, and you could give feedback. And this would be an example how you could, instead of saying great job, good to see you again, way to work, you could look at this and say, hey, we want to try to squeeze a little more intensity out of this. How can we get into the green? What weights were you using? It was pretty heavy. How many reps were you doing? 8. I was hitting more like 12. Well, let's up the weight a little and let's do more like 8 reps. Well, maybe they're already doing that. Well, what else can you address? And this is where you can talk about tempo. Maybe encourage them to do a 2-1-3 where, it's 2 on the concentric, pause for a second, and then 3 seconds on the eccentric, and see if that makes a difference. And I bet when they do those 8 reps with a 2-1-3 tempo, you're going to see that curve kind of shift up a little bit and get better results. So these are just examples of how you can, again, use the technology to add value, which will ultimately get results and show improvement. And in the end, this will keep people more engaged, wanting more, and it ultimately will improve the retention and keep them coming back. So I hope this webinar provided you a few concepts you can utilize with your own training or with your clients. And just a quick recap, you see the 5 points there. Those were the main concepts. And for those getting the credit, if you take the quiz online, there's some questions around that. And that's all I have. So hopefully we got a time for a question or two. And I think Nate's going to chime back in here.
Yep. Thanks, George. We actually got a ton of questions. We won't be able to get to all of them, unfortunately, but George will at some point. He's been really good at this in the past. I will send him a list of all the questions, and he will try to type out the answers to those questions, and we'll create a blog that we'll put on ACSM.org so everyone can see the questions and answers if your question was not answered today. But we do have some quick ones, and I'll go rapid fire for you. This one came from James. He says, how do you make sure that you don't overwhelm a new patient when doing evals? And what would you modify when working with pediatrics for evals?
Yeah, as far as the recommendation, I'd say sort of take it slow. Know your clientele, know the individual, have a conversation with them, see where they're at, see their background, their experience. If they've never done a whole lot before, or something that's going to be a lot different from somebody who maybe was an athlete in college and stuff like that. So I would say it's very individual specific. It's all, again, back to relationships and knowing people and kind of using your judgment and your sort of bag of tools and picking the appropriate thing. And it may be baby steps and a lot less initially with somebody who's new to it, or maybe has different goals or is coming with a different set of needs, as opposed to somebody else where you may dive right in and start getting into some more specific protocols and assessments.
Okay, this one comes from Joy. She says, can you address motivating weight loss with wearable tech and how to utilize it with HIIT training?
Yeah, so it's 2 different sides, weight loss, HIIT training. Obviously, HIIT training has a part with the weight loss because, putting in that high intensity work and, that's going to be good. And ultimately, if you look at weight loss, and there's 2 sides of it, unfortunately, and that's the other part that sometimes you don't have as much control over, is the calories coming in and the nutrition. So hopefully there's some of that component going on, and that's a big part of it as well. But at least on the expenditure side, how can you use wearable technology and stuff is basically having a good, reliable tool to give you accurate calorie expenditure. So oftentimes if you just, jump on a piece of equipment or something, it can be misleading. It may be overestimating, underestimating what you're burning. Usually, again, with a device like a heart rate monitor, that you're putting in your specific information, your height, weight, gender, birthday, even your VO2 score, your fitness level. Like the more information it has, the more accurate the calorie counter. So if it is something that you're actually charting and trending, obviously doing a food diary or tracking the calories in is important, but now you have something reliable tracking the output, and even something as simple as looking at weekly calorie expenditure from exercise and kind of charting and trending that and looking at it alongside with a food diary or whatever you're using to track your intake, and kind of seeing that balance and using that as a tool.
And we'll get to a couple more real quick. This one's from Matthew. He says, what is an exercise protocol to do before the 2-minute recovery test?
Could you say that one again, Nate?
What is an exercise protocol to do before the 2-minute recovery test?
There's nothing specific that was mentioned in the one I was referencing. It's basically just like any of them, it's a gradual warm-up. So if you wanted to use a bike, a treadmill, an elliptical, just to kind of gradually build up. And then the goal is to get to a working intensity between that 60 to 80%. And that's kind of the key. You don't just want to start doing a bunch of burpees or squat jumps or something and get to 60 to 80. You want to, I'd say 5-10 minutes of a gradual warm up on a bike, elliptical, treadmill, something like that. And then, get working closer to the 80%, but as long as you're within that 60 to 80, record it, sit, relax for 2 minutes and take a look again.
And then the final question has to do with the Polar Flow software I think you were talking about. This one comes from Emily. She says, how do you get the software for the group class, specifically the handheld device? Is there a way to getting that? And then there's another question that sort of relates to that, asking about where on the Polar website can they find the different charts and things that you are referencing to.
Yeah, I'll look that one up, Nate. I can't remember off the top of my head which link or whatever I went to get the Polar test, but I'll put something out, like a link or something to that. As far as getting information and stuff, if you go on the Polar site, it is hard to find sometimes, but if you can find a group solutions tab, within that you'll see a health club and things like that, and then it'll have like the Polar Club and other solutions. I think there's a link for like team sports, there's health club and things. So, and as far as the handheld devices, there's two options for individual use. You can use an Android or an iPhone, and that's just the Polar Beat app, which you can see your heart rate and stuff on your screen. That's just for one user, like for your own personal use. And that's the Polar Beat app, like Heartbeat, B-E-A-T. But the one I was kind of showing all the pictures with the heart rate up on the screen and for the class and all that, that's the Polar Club. And for that, you would contact us and we get you set up. But all you need hardware-wise, like I showed, was your participants need either a chest strap or a watch. And basically all you need is an iPad to run it at the facility. So you'd need an iPad. And obviously if you want to project it up or something, having a TV or a projector, but really an iPad, the hardware, and there is a monthly licensing fee with that for Polar. So if you, again, can find it on Group Solutions, there's a, I'm interested, or contact me, and, we can get back to you with all that information.
Got it. And then there's actually another couple questions about this too. Does that software, is it compatible with other devices as well, or does it have to be all Polar devices?
Yeah, for the Polar Club, it's specifically Polar, and not even all Polar devices. It's, the H10 chest strap, the H7 chest strap, the ones that have the Bluetooth Smart technology, and then the newer wrist units that have the optical heart rate would work as well. Like I mentioned, the A370, M430, the M200 would work also. So there's a few options for wrist units, a couple different chest strap and sensors, but for the Polar app, you got to be using Polar devices for that piece. There are other apps out there, just general fitness tracking apps, Map My Run, Strava, different things like that, that if it just needs a Bluetooth sensor, like, different sensors will work. It doesn't really matter. So that kind of fits. But for the Polar Club solution, it's specific to pick up Polar sensors. Got
it. Thanks, George. And thanks for everybody for asking those questions. I didn't get to hardly any of them, really. We had a whole bunch of questions this time, which is great. And I'll share those with George, and hopefully we can turn those into a blog. But with that, this concludes the webinar. Just a friendly reminder that I will be sending out an email with a link to the CEC, along with a PDF copy of today's slides and a recorded version of the webinar as well. That should be coming to your inbox by the end of the day tomorrow. And in that email will also be a survey, and we appreciate your feedback. If you can take 2 minutes to fill out that survey. And with that, again, thanks, George, for your time. Thanks to everyone for participating. This concludes the webinar, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks.